They told me to sleep on the floor, so I quietly bought the house next door and built a pool. Sounds dramatic. Right. But I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because I needed to remind myself that I still existed. My name is Beyonce Knowles, 33 years old, sound designer by training, problem solver by survival, and invisible daughter by experience. When people hear my name, they expect stardom or glitter. The reality, I was curled on a dusty throw pillow beside a scratched coffee table in my mother's cramped living room, pretending to sleep while my sister threw a party 3 feet away. I had no door to close, no wall to lean against, and no one in that house who seemed to notice I was slipping away. A year before that night, I had been consulting for mid-tier music studios, optimizing room acoustics and soundproofing systems across Austin. I wasn't famous, but I had clients who trusted me, invoices that cleared, and a reputation for being the quiet genius in a male-dominated field. Then the funding dried up, the streaming bubble wobbled, contracts got pulled mid-project, and the final blow came when my longtime collaborator, Terrell, signed an exclusivity deal with a new media platform, one I introduced him to. The contract was supposed to have my name on it. Instead, they chose Jade, my younger sister, content creator, social media face, my antithesis. The part that hurt wasn't that she took it. It's that she didn't even tell me. One afternoon, I opened Instagram and saw a behind-the-scenes clip of her and Terrell laughing in a glass-walled recording room I designed. She captioned it, "The dream team just got started." My stomach dropped. I stared at that post for 5 full minutes, heart thudding like an echo chamber in an empty studio. I called her. No answer. I texted her. Read. No reply. That night, I packed the essentials and drove to my mother's house with one suitcase and a faded hope that family would at least offer shelter, if not comfort, just for a few weeks. I sat at the door until I get back on my feet. My mother, Carmen, didn't seem thrilled. She stood blocking the entryway like a hotel clerk, unsure about a walk-in guest. But she opened the door. "You can stay in the den for now." She said, "Jade's using the guest room for her editing setup." I didn't argue. I was too tired, too bruised from the betrayal, too ashamed of coming home empty-handed. I made a little bed from couch cushions and a thin quilt I found in the laundry room. It wasn't comfortable, but it was quiet for the first 2 nights. Then came the slow erasure. Jade began walking in late at night with friends, giggling, tossing her keys, acting as if my sleeping spot was just part of the furniture arrangement. Mom cooked for her, but not for me, when I tried to share about my recent certification in 3D audio mapping. Mom nodded, then turned to ask Jade about her latest sponsorship. Once, I caught Terrell's voice coming through Jade's phone speaker. My heart clenched like a fist. I turned away and kept wiping the countertop, like I wasn't hearing the man who had once said I was the best creative partner he ever had. After 2 weeks, I noticed my things were being moved, not lost, just relocated without warning. My toothbrush was gone from the bathroom sink, my charger unplugged and tossed into the hallway basket. Then, one Saturday morning, I came back from a local library shift to find my makeshift bedding rolled up and shoved under the couch. My laptop was on the floor. The message was unspoken but loud. There was no space for me here, not just physically, emotionally, energetically. Jade had taken the air out of every room and somehow filled it with her glossy success and curated charm. When I brought it up to my mom, her response sliced deeper than anything Jade ever said. "Beyonce, maybe it's time you stop waiting for the world to recognize you and start over somewhere else. You're not a kid anymore." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I knew arguing would only make me look ungrateful. That night, I lay on the hardwood floor with one thin sheet under me, and the muffled sound of Jade's voice recording TikTok audio above me. Every vibration of her footsteps was a reminder of who belonged here and who didn't. I stayed silent, but inside, something hard and cold began to form. It wasn't anger. It was something older. That ancient instinct to prove you still matter even when everyone else forgets your name. I didn't want to win them back. I wanted to rebuild something that couldn't be taken away. I wanted a room of my own, no. A life of my own where I didn't need validation to breathe. So while they planned Jade's next content shoot, I quietly pulled out my old laptop, refreshed my resume, and reached out to every industry contact who still remembered me. I wasn't begging for a break. I was looking for a door, even if I had to build it myself. And just when it seemed like nothing would shift, an unexpected email popped up in my inbox. It was from Richard Torres, a producer I once helped with an acoustic overhaul at a local arts venue. His message was simple: Beyoncé. We're launching a new boutique studio space in East Austin. Want to be the lead sound designer? It's yours if you want it. I stared at that message until my eyes blurred. Then I closed the laptop slowly, turned over on the floor, and whispered to myself what no one else in that house ever had. You are not finished. The day I received Richard Torres's email, the floor suddenly didn't feel as permanent, but a job offer wasn't a rescue, it was a key. And I still had to find the door. I didn't leap with joy or scream in the hallway. I didn't tell my mother or Jade. I sat there for a few minutes on that hardwood floor, back against the wall, the air conditioner humming above me, and I planned. The project Richard offered wasn't just another gig. It was a full design contract for a boutique recording space downtown, part of a larger creative compound, being built to nurture underrepresented voices in music. It would be my concept, my specs, my hands shaping the way sound moved through every corner of that studio. It wasn't just work, it was legacy. I responded with one sentence: I accept. Let me know the next step. Richard called me the same afternoon. He remembered everything: my work ethic, my obsession with clean acoustics, my knack for balancing design with technicality. He said they needed someone quiet but precise, and that no one fit that profile like me. I thanked him. I didn't tell him I was currently sleeping 10 feet from the fridge on a borrowed blanket while my mother doted on a daughter who couldn't tell a Neumann from a napkin. I didn't tell him I was drinking discount coffee and showering before sunrise so no one would see me occupying space in the hallway. I just said, I'll be ready. The next 3 days, I worked like a ghost. I slipped in and out of the house before anyone was awake. I set up at coffee shops and libraries, redrafting studio layouts, researching materials, calculating isolation coefficients. My laptop became an extension of my fingers. My earbuds stayed in even when there was no sound, just to remind myself that I belonged to something no one else could touch. The design took shape fast. I knew exactly what I wanted the room to feel like before anyone ever walked in. It had to be warm but crisp, private but alive. A space where silence felt like intention, not neglect. Jade asked where I'd been disappearing to. I told her I was volunteering at a nonprofit. Mom didn't even ask. One evening, as I returned from a long client call, I overheard them in the kitchen. I don't know what Beyoncé's doing with herself, Mom said flatly. She comes and goes like she's a guest here. Doesn't help out much. Jade murmured something I couldn't hear, probably defending me in that vague, half-hearted way that makes everyone feel comfortable. I didn't get mad. I just wrote a new note in my phone titled, Never Again, Ask for Space You Have to Earn. That weekend, I scheduled a meeting with Jonah Lee, A local loan officer I'd worked with before when one of my old clients was remodeling their home studio. I booked the appointment under my business name, BK Acoustics. I wore the one-press blazer I still owned and brought a printed proposal with projected earnings from the new job and a modest savings record. Jonah looked over the numbers, nodded, and said something that almost cracked my facade. "You've been quiet lately. Beyoncé. But your numbers, they speak loud." I didn't smile. I just signed the pre-approval documents with a steady hand. 2 days later, I toured a small fixer-upper listed just 1 block away from my mother's house. It was run down, poorly staged, with faded carpet and water-stained ceilings. The backyard was wild and unkept, but the walls were solid, the bones were clean, and best of all, the layout was acoustically symmetrical, almost impossible to find at that price point. I stood in the main room, closed my eyes, and imagined the silence bending exactly how I wanted it to. I made an offer that afternoon. I didn't tell a soul. The bank called. The offer was accepted. Closing was scheduled in 17 days, every day after work. I drove by the house just to look at it. I studied the way the evening light touched the porch. I noted where the windows faced. I imagined which corner would hold my desk and which part of the yard could fit a pool. The idea came gently at first, just a whimsical thought. But the more I was ignored at home, the more it hardened into a plan. One morning, I returned home to find that my bedding had been moved again. Not just moved, but shoved behind the couch like trash. My pillow was on the floor, stained. Jade stood in the kitchen laughing over something on her phone, probably unaware. Mom walked past me without eye contact, busy making lemon bars for Jade's shoot that afternoon. I asked her if there was room in the garage to store my gear, just temporary. She didn't even look up. Jade's camera crew is using the garage this week. Maybe try the shed. I walked out that afternoon and didn't come back until after midnight. No one texted. No one noticed. That night, I lay on the hard floor, my arms folded under my head, and stared at the ceiling. I wasn't angry. I was done, not broken done. There's a difference. Broken people wait for rescue. Done people build their own door. That's when I pulled up my notes app and wrote 3 words: build the pool. The same backyard I'd stared at for years, the same grass I played in as a child, was about to become the boundary between who I used to be and who I was becoming. And this time, no one would move me out of anything, ever again. 17 days passed without ceremony. On the morning of the closing, I left the house before dawn, dressed in clean jeans and a fitted black shirt. My one concession to the occasion. The bank office smelled like copier ink and lemon air freshener, and I signed each page with the calm of someone who already knew what her name meant. No one handed me a trophy. No one clapped. But when the notary pushed the final document across the table and said, "Congratulations, homeowner," something unspoken cracked wide open inside me. For the first time in over a year, I belonged somewhere that couldn't be taken from me overnight. I held the keys in my hand and said nothing, just nodded, just breathed. The house wasn't glamorous. It was dated and dusty and filled with the kind of silence most people would find depressing. But I walked through every room as if I had designed it myself. The living room had a faint slant in the floorboards that would require leveling. The kitchen window faced east, catching morning light that slid across the tile like sound across a clean mix. The main bedroom smelled like mildew, but the ceiling was high and the walls thick. Every flaw was a puzzle I could solve. I made a to-do list that night. sitting cross-legged on the bare floor with a flashlight and a legal pad. I labeled the rooms. I mapped out acoustic treatments in the walls. And then I drew a box in the backyard and wrote 3 words beneath it: pool goes here. That weekend, I hired Maria Lopez, a local interior architect I'd met during a client event years earlier. She was sharp, fast, and spoke in diagrams, the kind of person who didn't blink when I told her I wanted a minimalist studio office built into the guest room and a sleek saltwater pool installed outside the kitchen window. She raised an eyebrow when I said I wanted the pool centered in the direct line of sight from my mother's breakfast nook. Symbolic much, she asked, lips twitching. It's practical, I replied. North-facing shade in the afternoon. Ideal for cooling. She smirked and sketched a clean rectangle with waterfall edges. Construction began in phases. The first week, a crew gutted the interior, ripped out the old carpet, removed the flaking wallpaper, and replaced corroded plumbing. I split my time between design meetings with Richard Torres's team and site visits at my own home, often scheduling deliveries during my lunch breaks. I had no assistant, no truck, and barely enough sleep, but I moved like a machine in the evenings. I returned to my mother's house, laid my blanket on the living room floor, and acted like nothing was changing. They didn't ask where I'd been, and I didn't offer. By the 3rd week, the drywall was up, the electrical rewired, and the flooring delivered. I chose matte concrete for the common areas and soft walnut wood for the bedrooms, clean, grounded, intentional, the kind of flooring you could lie down on and feel like a person, not a placeholder. In my studio room, I installed acoustic panels with embedded LED strips that change temperature throughout the day to support creative cycles. The ceiling was treated with cloud baffles, and a velvet blackout curtain separated the mixing desk from the vocal booth I was quietly building inside a former walk-in closet. It was the kind of space I used to dream about when I was 15, recording demos on a borrowed mic and layering tracks with headphones held together by electrical tape. I hired Mr. Lin, a quiet, soft-spoken contractor who specialized in hardscaping and outdoor installations. His quote for the pool was higher than expected, but his work was exact. When I told him I wanted the edge of the pool to align precisely with the line of sight from the second window of the house next door, he didn't flinch. He just measured, twice. "You want the water line visible from the other kitchen?" he asked. "Exactly." He nodded, scribbled in his notebook, and said, "We'll start digging Tuesday." That Tuesday morning, I got up at 5:00 a.m., brushed my teeth in silence, and folded my sleeping blanket one final time. I left it in the corner without comment. No note, no drama. I packed my things in 2 duffel bags and quietly slipped out the door while the house was still asleep. I walked 1 block down, unlocked my front door, and stepped inside the home I had rebuilt from the bones up. The air smelled faintly of plaster and cedar oil. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, and the room was still, peaceful, mine. I spent the day assembling furniture. The sofa came in 3 separate boxes, the desk in 6. My bed was a platform I built myself using reclaimed wood from a soundstage demolition that evening. As I was aligning the last screws in the custom shelving unit, I heard the excavation begin, the low grind of machinery, the scrape of steel against soil, the shovels and drills that would shape the symbol I'd been silently constructing for weeks. My phone buzzed once. It was a text from Jade. "Hey, Mom's looking for you. Are you coming back for dinner?" I didn't reply. I turned off the phone. I poured myself a glass of water and stood in the kitchen, watching the pool pit take form. Each scoop of earth pulled from the backyard felt like unearthing something buried deeper than anger. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. I didn't want them to suffer. I just wanted them to see, not for applause, not for guilt, just for the record. I slept better that night than I had in months. No footsteps overhead, no laughter at my expense, no need to shrink myself smaller just to be tolerated. Just me, in my own space, surrounded by clean walls and the low hum of progress vibrating through the earth outside as I drifted off. I thought about something Mr. Lin had said earlier. The first dig always makes noise, but it's the framing that lasts. And I knew then that this wasn't about building a house. It was about framing the version of myself they were never interested in seeing. 3 days into the excavation, the first crack appeared not in the foundation of my new home, but in the silence next door. I was in the kitchen adjusting the under-cabinet lighting when I saw my mother through her window, standing with a coffee mug frozen mid-air, staring directly at the pit in my backyard. Mr. Lin's team was finishing the rebar placement, a delicate steel lattice that would soon shape the pool's skeleton. She looked puzzled at first, then visibly unsettled. I stepped away from the window before our eyes could meet. I wasn't interested in confrontation. I wanted clarity, and clarity often arrives in silence, not sound. That evening, a knock landed on my door, sharp, familiar, uninvited. I waited 3 seconds before answering. Mom stood on my porch, still wearing her slippers, her hair tied back in a loose knot like she'd come over in a rush of instinct. Not intention. She didn't say hello, just stared past me into the living room like she was trying to understand what she had missed. "Beyoncé," she said slowly. "What is this?" I tilted my head. "What does it look like?" She blinked. "You bought this house." When, how her voice wasn't angry yet, just off balance. 3 weeks ago, I said evenly. "I moved in yesterday. It's mine." Her gaze flicked to the framed acoustic blueprints on the wall, then to the open boxes labeled studio gear, then back to me. "You didn't say anything." I nodded. "Neither did you when you rolled my blanket up and shoved it under the couch." She flinched, barely, but enough for me to know she remembered. "We didn't know you were this busy," she said. "It seemed like you were just—" She trailed off. I waited. She didn't finish. "Just what I asked." The silence that followed was thick. I could hear the drill whine outside as they reinforced the pool frame. "Are you trying to prove something?" she asked, voice tightening. To us, I smiled then, not out of joy, but clarity. "No," I said, "not to you, to myself." She shifted her weight, still searching for leverage. "Well, Jade saw the trucks. She was surprised. She'll live," I replied, like I did. I didn't invite her in. After a pause, she stepped back. "We'll talk again," she said, like a closing argument. "If you want. If I want." I echoed, and I closed the door gently. I didn't expect her to understand right away. People who treat you like an afterthought don't realize they've been muted until you stop trying to explain yourself. That week, Jade sent me a series of short texts. "You moved. Why didn't you tell me Mom is freaking out, LOL?" I didn't reply. I was too busy drafting final renderings for Richard's studio and supervising tile selection for my bathroom. The house was transforming fast. Every brushed nickel fixture, every recessed light, every warm-toned finish was a defiant whisper. I'm not broken. I'm building. By the second week, the pool had form, concrete shell complete, plumbing installed. The waterfall feature was underway. I made sure the cascade faced the direction of my mother's kitchen window, not to provoke, but to remind. The same eyes that watched me sleep on the floor would now have to watch water flow freely just beyond their reach. One afternoon, while I was testing speaker placement in my studio room, Jade showed up, No text, no warning, just a knock and her face behind the frosted glass. I opened the door without greeting. She took one look inside and her jaw dropped. "This is yours," she whispered. "All of it, every square foot." I said. She stepped in slowly, like she was entering a museum. "I had no idea you were doing this," she said after a minute. "Mom thought you were lost or something." "I was," I said, briefly, "but not anymore." She wandered toward the hallway. "Can I see?" I nodded. She moved slowly, quietly, like she didn't want to disrupt the energy. She paused in the studio room, taking in the mixing desk, the sound panels, the modular lighting. "It's nicer than Terrell's setup." She murmured. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She turned to me. "I think we messed up," she said. "All of us." That almost made me laugh. "You think?" I replied. Not bitter, just observant. She tried to explain. Said it happened fast. Said she didn't know how much it hurt. Said she thought I didn't care that much about the contract. "You never made a big deal out of anything," she said. "You were always so chill." I wasn't chill. I corrected her. I was surviving. She went quiet. "Do you hate me?" she asked, like a kid. "No," I said, "but I don't trust you. Yet." That yet surprised her. She nodded. "Fair." Then she asked, "Can we try again?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked out the window at the backyard, where the reflection of the unfinished waterfall danced in the sunlight. "Maybe," I said finally. "If you understand this time, that proximity doesn't equal permission." She stayed a few more minutes, then left. No hug, no guilt trip, just a quiet exit, and I respected her for that. Later that night, I stood barefoot in my living room, looking through the same window, and I saw her silhouette across the yard, looking back. This time. She didn't wave, and I didn't either. We just looked, eye to eye, neighbor to neighbor, not enemies, not family, something in between. The next morning, I received an email from Richard. "They're asking to interview you." He wrote, "A local podcast about women in sound wants to feature your story, how you rose from nowhere, how you built your own space." I stared at the screen, rose from nowhere. I almost laughed. The truth was, I didn't rise from nowhere. I rose from the floor. The podcast episode dropped 2 weeks later. I hadn't expected it to matter. I showed up to the interview wearing black jeans and a white tee. No makeup, no pitch. I spoke calmly, explained what I did, how I built sound environments that supported creativity, how I designed my studio to hold silence and resonance in equal measure. But when the host leaned in and asked what inspired the shift from working behind the scenes to building a studio from the ground up, I paused. Then I said it clearly. I used to sleep on a floor 10 feet away from people who thought I had nothing to say. So I built a room where my voice could live, even if no one visited. There was a long pause. The host didn't interrupt. Then she said, "That's not just architecture, that's reclamation." The clip went semi-viral, not massive, not millions, just enough, just the right people, creators who messaged me to say they knew what it felt like to be erased while still breathing. Former clients who said they finally understood the silence I carried back then. 2 new offers followed, one from a visual artist building an immersive gallery downtown, another from a music nonprofit focused on youth education. I didn't say yes to either. Not yet. Not because I wasn't grateful, but because for the first time in a long time, I had space to be selective. At home, the noise changed, or maybe my tolerance did. I began waking up before the construction crews arrived, brewing coffee in my kitchen and watching the waterfall shimmer in the morning light. Mr. Lin finished the final surfacing by mid-May. The pool was long, rectangular, and quiet. Not flashy, just elegant. Water fell in a gentle cascade down one side. The sound soft enough to relax your pulse without drawing attention. It was, by design, unignorable from my mother's window. One morning, I saw her standing there again, coffee cup in hand, same spot. This time, she didn't look away when I met her eyes, but she didn't come over either. The message had landed. There was nothing left to explain. Inside, my life expanded. I began hosting quiet sessions for local musicians who couldn't afford professional studio time. I didn't advertise. Word traveled gently. A saxophonist on her third try at an album. A poet needing clean audio for a spoken word grant. A father recording lullabies for his daughter before his second deployment. No one paid up front. Some never paid at all. That wasn't the point. The room held them like it had held me. And in those moments, I stopped feeling like a woman building a monument to her own grief. I felt like a builder again, like someone whose purpose had a pulse. Jade visited 3 more times that month. Each time she brought less performance, more presence. She asked real questions. She admitted that the deal with Terrell hadn't gone the way she expected, that his vision was rigid and his partnerships were transactional, that she missed the way we used to talk about ideas late at night. I didn't gloat, I just listened. Then I showed her the vocal booth I'd built, the sound trap I'd invented using recycled foam and salvaged panels. She stood in that tiny space, closed the door, and whispered, "It's dead quiet in here. That's the point," I said. "When there's no noise, you hear the truth." She nodded. And for the first time, I believed she understood, not just what I built, but why. The real shift happened in late June. My mother appeared on my porch again. No knock this time, just stood there, holding a plate of lemon bars. "Thought you might want some," she said. I took them, said thank you, didn't invite her in. She didn't ask. "Your place looks good," she said after a beat. "I didn't realize you had all this in you." "That's because you weren't looking," I replied. She exhaled through her nose. I guess I wasn't. There was no apology in her voice, just observation. She looked over at the pool. That waterfall's loud in the morning, not as loud as silence. I said. She didn't argue, just stood there like a woman realizing she was no longer the central character in a story she thought she understood. "I hope we can talk more," she said. "Eventually." I nodded. "Eventually." And I closed the door. That night, I hosted my first real gathering. No guest list, no invites, just a few people from Richard's team, a neighbor, a singer I'd mixed vocals for the week before. We stood by the pool as dusk fell, drinks in hand, music low, laughter easy. I didn't perform. I didn't lead. I just belonged. At one point, I walked into the kitchen and glanced toward the window. Lights were on next door. I saw movement behind the blinds, watching. Maybe, or maybe not. It didn't matter. I had nothing to prove. My story wasn't about showing them what they lost. It was about remembering what I still had. As the night ended and guests filtered out, one by one, I stayed by the edge of the pool, water lapping quietly, stars reflecting across its surface. I thought about every night I lay on a borrowed blanket in that cramped living room, trying to breathe smaller so I didn't take up too much space. And I realized something. That pool wasn't just for show. It wasn't revenge. It was my voice in physical form, fluid, constant, quietly undeniable. And the best part, I didn't have to say a word. By mid-July, the tone had changed not in words, but in posture. My mother no longer knocked. She hovered. I'd catch glimpses of her from across the driveway, standing outside to water a flower bed that hadn't seen life in 2 seasons, glancing toward my house as if proximity alone could rebuild something. But I didn't move toward her. I didn't close the distance. I had spent too long compressing myself to fit into rooms where no one asked if I was okay. I wasn't going to break my stride now just because the silence had become inconvenient for them. Growth, when it's real, becomes visible. It shifts the dynamic without permission. What triggered the next rupture was a feature article in a local design magazine. They had visited the studio weeks earlier, quietly impressed by the minimalist functionality and the subtle acoustic precision I'd built into the walls. But what caught attention wasn't just the space, it was the story behind it. The piece was titled Built from the Floor Beyoncé Knowles and the Architecture of Worth. I hadn't chosen that headline, but I didn't object either, because it was true. The writer had asked one question that stuck with me. What was the hardest part of building this space? I had answered, knowing that the people closest to me didn't think I could. The article was respectful, honest, no names named, no blame cast, but truth has a way of exposing what it needs to without decoration. The next day, my mother left a voicemail. Her tone was brittle, guarded. I read the article, interesting piece, a little dramatic maybe, but congrats. I didn't return the call because that message wasn't for me. It was for her pride, a way to say, I noticed, without ever saying. I was wrong. Jade texted me later. Mom's weird about the article, but I loved it. You sounded like you. I appreciated that, quietly, but I still didn't engage deeply, because forgiveness without accountability becomes permission, and I wasn't handing that out anymore. The truth was, I had stopped waiting for reconciliation the day I poured the first bucket of paint in my studio. What I wanted now wasn't revenge. It was continuity. The kind of life where I didn't have to recover from people I lived with. The kind of space where I could be seen without performing worth. That clarity made me fierce in my boundaries when Terrell emailed, asking if I'd consider consulting on his next sound series. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, but because I had nothing left to explain. We had different values. That was enough. By August, my work with Richard's studio had expanded. He offered me a creative director role for all future builds. It came with a flexible contract, a retainer, and autonomy. The title didn't change me. It simply reflected who I'd always been, just no longer filtered through someone else's lens. Around the same time, a city council rep reached out about collaborating on an educational audio lab in East Austin. They'd read the magazine article, said it felt grounded, not curated. That meant more to me than any applause. At home, the pool became a quiet ritual. I swam late, after dark. Under string lights, I hung from a trellis I built with my own hands. It was never about showing off. It was about the quiet contrast. That just one fence over. I used to lie on the floor feeling like an inconvenience, and now I floated under stars in a space I crafted from scratch. Some nights, I'd hear muffled arguments next door, Jade and my mom disagreeing about something. I never listened too long, not out of cruelty, just preservation. Their chaos wasn't mine to decode anymore. One Sunday afternoon, as I trimmed the small garden I'd planted by the back gate, my mother approached. She didn't call my name, just stood on her side of the fence, eyes scanning the yard. Your lavender's thriving, she said. I kept trimming. Must be the soil. I replied. She paused. It's hard not seeing you. That was your choice, I said calmly. You set the terms the moment you told me the floor was fine for me. Her eyes welled, but not with tears, with realization, the kind that doesn't come in a single moment, but builds through years of small dismissals. I didn't think you'd take it so personally. That's the problem. I said, you didn't think at all. She didn't argue this time, just looked down, then back up. What happens now? She asked. I leaned my pruning shears on the fence post and met her eyes. That depends on whether you want a relationship with me or with the version of me that didn't speak up. The silence stretched. Then she nodded, slowly, as if the answer wasn't easy, and walked away, not defeated, just undone. That evening, Jade texted again. I think Mom's starting to get it. Finally. I didn't ask for details. I didn't ask her to mediate, but I replied this time. It's not about getting it. It's about living differently. She replied with a heart emoji and a simple sentence. You're teaching all of us more than you know. I set the phone down and walked out to the pool, dipping my toes in first, then lowering myself into the water. The lights shimmered across the surface like a slow exhale. I floated silently, arms open, face to the sky. This wasn't the end of a revenge story. This was the middle of a reclamation, a personal reinvention that didn't require anyone's applause or forgiveness. The true revenge wasn't the pool, or the house, or the article. It was the fact that I no longer needed anyone to understand me in order to feel whole. And when they realized that I became unreachable in the most beautiful way. The strange thing about healing is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't show up like a bright morning or a headline. It arrives in small, quiet moments that feel unremarkable at first, like saying no without explanation, like not flinching when someone doesn't clap for you, like walking past a house you used to feel invisible in and not feeling anything at all. That was me by late summer, not triumphant, not bitter, just steady. I had become the kind of person who didn't have to defend her presence, and the silence that used to suffocate me had turned into space to breathe, to create, to exist fully. My studio had turned into more than a workplace. It had become a sanctuary, a small but growing community of artists, thinkers, and outliers found their way to my door. Some came with trembling voices and no budget. Others came with plans but no place to begin. I welcomed them all with the same quiet clarity. This wasn't charity. It was exchange. They brought truth. I offered structure, and in doing so, we proved that dignity isn't a luxury. It's a design choice. Then one Thursday, I got a knock that wasn't from a client or a neighbor. It was Jade again, but different this time. She wasn't fidgeting or overly bright. She had a folder in her hand and a question on her face. Can I show you something? I stepped aside. She placed the folder on my kitchen island and opened it to reveal a vision board, rough sketches, and a handwritten outline. I'm applying to an artist residency, she said, but I want to create something real. Not content, not trending, just something I care about. She paused. I want to document women rebuilding their lives after being erased, not with drama, with detail. Can I learn from you? It took me a second to process the request. This was the same sister who once let me be pushed to the floor without raising her voice, the same girl who laughed with her friends while I curled up under a coffee table. But now she was standing in my kitchen, asking to learn not just from my craft but from my conviction. And for the first time, I saw the possibility of something more than repair. I saw growth. I'm not a mentor, I said. I don't hand out roadmaps. She nodded. I'm not asking for one. Just permission to walk beside you while I find mine. So I gave her access, not authority, not approval, just access. I let her observe my sessions, ask questions, listen to the silence between takes. She came early, took notes, cleaned the mic stands without being asked. She never mentioned our past, and I never demanded a confession, because what mattered more than apology was presence. And she showed up consistently, with humility. That was enough. Mom noticed the shift. Of course. One afternoon she came by again, holding a pie she didn't bake. "I've been thinking about the pool," she said. I didn't reply. She continued, "I used to think it was excessive, but now I understand it's a message." I nodded. "Not a message to you, a message to me." She looked uncomfortable, as if realizing how far from the center of the story she'd always assumed she was. "I want us to be close again," she offered gently. "I don't want us to stay like this." I looked at her and said the most honest thing I could. "I don't want to go back to being someone you ignore in plain sight." Her face fell, not from offense, but from the weight of recognition. She stepped back, and I didn't stop her. Some doors don't close loudly. They just stop being opened. The truth is, I wasn't angry anymore. I was alert. I had learned that love without respect is just possession in disguise. That family is not a guarantee of kindness. And that sometimes, building a boundary is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. That boundary, for me, had taken the shape of a house, a studio, a pool, and a life designed with intention, not to shut people out, but to filter who had earned the right to stay. By the end of the season, I was preparing to host a small showcase in the studio. 5 artists who had worked in the space were debuting their projects, from spoken word albums to sound collages to immersive ambient tracks. I didn't advertise widely, just invited those who had poured something real into the process. Jade curated the visuals. I let her. She had earned that trust not with words, but with presence, the night of the showcase, as guests settled into the space. I stood in the back watching the lights dim, the sound bloom, the room inhale and exhale with purpose. Mom was not invited. That was intentional, the version of me she was most familiar with. The quiet daughter who minimized herself for approval no longer lived here. This space, this night, this version of me wasn't for her consumption. It was for those who saw me when I was still under construction. As the final piece played, a hush fell over the room. It was Jade's composition, a layered audio essay about erasure, voice, and finding space. At the end, she stood silently beside the screen and said only, "I used to be loud for the wrong reasons. This year, I learned to listen." There were no claps at first, just stillness. Then, one by one, the room responded, not with applause, but with breath, the kind of collective exhale that says we've all been somewhere we didn't belong, and maybe, just maybe, we don't have to go back. That night, after everyone left, I stood by the pool again. The water reflected the soft amber of the porch lights, and the air held that rare blend of warmth and distance that only late summer carries. I thought about every inch of that journey. From the floor I slept on to the fence I built, from the silence I survived to the room I claimed. I wasn't waiting to be seen anymore. I had become the kind of person who didn't just take up space, but designed it. I stopped waiting for an apology the day I realized I didn't need closure. I needed clarity. And by the time fall settled over Austin, I had more clarity than I ever expected. Clarity about where I stood, about what I deserved, about who I had become. It didn't arrive in some dramatic final confrontation. There was no screaming match, no tears in the driveway, no moment where someone begged for forgiveness. It came instead during a routine walk through my neighborhood, when a neighbor I barely knew stopped me near the mailbox and said, "Hey, aren't you the woman who built the studio? My niece wants to do sound design. I told her your story. I thanked her, smiled politely, and kept walking. But the sentence echoed, your story, not their version, not the edited one, mine. Back at home, I found myself moving slower, not from exhaustion, but from peace. The kind of pace you adopt when you're no longer trying to prove anything. My mornings had rhythm, my nights had ease. I lit candles without reason. I kept the house clean not to impress anyone, but because it made me feel steady. Jade still visited, sometimes just to sit on the floor of the studio and listen to raw audio I was working with. Other times to ask small, quiet questions. She no longer acted like the expert in the room, and I didn't act like I needed her to understand everything all at once. We coexisted, carefully but comfortably, like two versions of the past slowly learning how to meet in the present. The only thing still unsettled was my mother. Her presence lingered just outside the edges of my life, like a question I had already answered but hadn't erased. She left gifts now and then, fresh bread on the porch, clipped articles about women in tech, once even a house plant with a sticky note that said, "For light and resilience." But she never stayed. She hadn't been inside the house once. I never invited her, not out of spite, but out of balance, the kind of balance that comes from knowing some people only visit to feel less guilty, not more connected. Then, one afternoon in October, she sent a message that didn't sound like her usual passive pleasantries. It read, "Jade told me about the showcase. I know I wasn't invited. I get it. But I've been writing something. I don't expect you to read it. Just wanted you to have it." A few hours later, I found an envelope taped gently to my front door. No name, just sealed parchment paper and 3 carefully folded pages inside. I didn't open it right away. I left it on the console table for 3 days. Not because I was nervous, but because I was no longer ruled by urgency. When I finally read it, it wasn't revolutionary. It didn't fix anything. It wasn't even particularly poetic, but it was honest. She wrote about her own upbringing, about what it meant to her to raise 2 daughters so different in temperament and path. She admitted that she had been drawn toward the louder one, the shinier one, the one who asked for more and made her feel needed. She wrote, "You never begged for attention, so I assumed you didn't need it. I confused strength with sufficiency. That line stayed with me, not because it excused anything, but because it named something I had always felt without words." At the end of the letter, she said, "You built something extraordinary, and I can finally say I see it. I see you. Whether you let me in again is up to you, but I'll be here. No assumptions this time." I folded the letter carefully, placed it in the drawer beside my bed, and sat in the quiet for a long while. I didn't cry. I didn't feel overwhelmed. I just felt still. It wasn't closure, but it was enough. Not enough to rebuild what was lost, but enough to stop carrying it like a wound. That weekend, I hosted a small retreat for 5 women I'd worked with over the past year. Each of them had created something raw and beautiful. Each of them had a story about being overlooked, undermined, or dismissed. We sat around the pool with mugs of tea and loose blankets, talking about structure and sabotage, survival and softness. At one point, someone asked what had finally shifted for me, what moment marked the beginning of change. I didn't have a glamorous answer. I just said, the moment I stopped asking other people to validate my worth. They all nodded, slowly, like it hit a place too deep for words. And I realized then that everything I had been through, all the humiliation, the silence, the small indignities of being invisible in a house full of people, had shaped something unshakable. Not armor, not bitterness, but direction. That clarity had carried me further than applause ever could. Later that night, after everyone had left, I stood alone by the water. The reflection was soft and wide. The sky above was open. The air smelled like cedar in late autumn. I looked at the home I had built, not just in bricks or panels or pool tiles, but in boundaries, decisions, and quiet refusals. I had chosen this version of my life, intentionally. I didn't need to be celebrated for it. I just needed to live it fully. And for the first time, I could honestly say I wasn't healing anymore. I was whole. It wasn't the housewarming party or the podcast episode or even the article that truly marked the change. It was a Tuesday morning, just after 8 a.m. The air was crisp, the kind that makes your skin aware of its own presence. I had just come back from a sunrise swim, hair still damp, robe wrapped around me, coffee in hand. The sound of my pool's soft cascade filled the background as I stepped into the kitchen, barefoot on warm tile, across the yard. I saw my mother's curtains shift. She was watching. Maybe she'd been watching for a while. Maybe this was her routine now, like mine. But what mattered wasn't that she looked. It was that I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink. I stood there in my home, with my silence, with my coffee, and I let her look, because there was nothing left to hide and nothing left to prove. By that point, the studio was fully booked 3 months ahead. People came from across the state just to spend 2 hours inside a space they'd only seen in grainy Instagram posts or heard about through mutual friends. What they found wasn't luxury. It was intimacy. Every wall had intention. Every surface was built for stillness. And when they asked how it came to be, I gave the same answer every time. I built it when no one believed I could, including the people who should have known better. That wasn't bitterness. It was biography. Jade had become something of an assistant by then. Though neither of us used that word, she showed up when she said she would. She learned the tech without needing hand-holding. She deferred when necessary and offered help without overstepping. Our relationship had reset itself around honesty, not performance, sometimes, after late-night sessions. We'd sit on the floor like we did when we were kids, legs stretched out, backs against the wall, and talk about what it meant to be women raised to seek permission. She'd tell me about her doubts, her shame over how she used to act. I didn't absolve her, but I didn't condemn her either. She was still learning, and that mattered more than any rehearsed apology ever could. The contrast between my home and the one next door became more obvious with time. While my space pulsed with quiet clarity, theirs often echoed with tension. I heard them arguing sometimes muffled words, sharp tones, footsteps that carried weight. I never leaned closer. I never opened my window. Their chaos wasn't my responsibility. And the old reflex, the one that told me to step in, fix, smooth it over, had finally died. Boundaries weren't walls. They were respect in physical form. The city called me later that month. They wanted to honor me at a community recognition event for women in creative leadership. It wasn't flashy, no red carpet, just an auditorium, a plaque, and a paragraph about impact. I said yes, but not for visibility. I said yes because of what it represented, a chapter closing, not the pain, but the invisibility. I invited Jade. I didn't invite my mother, not to punish her, but because I knew she wouldn't see the moment for what it was. Not really. Her presence would have made it about her discomfort, and that space belonged to my becoming. The night of the event, I stood at the podium under soft stage lights and looked out at a room full of strangers. I spoke plainly. I was told I had to wait my turn. That silence was grace. That if I worked quietly enough, someone would eventually notice. I stopped believing that, and I started building instead. The applause was gentle, not explosive, but it felt earned, and more than anything, it felt final, the kind of final that frees you, not the kind that cuts you off. Afterward, as Jade and I walked back to my car under the warm glow of streetlights, she looked at me and said, You know you did it. Right. Not just the house. The whole thing. You flipped the story. I smiled. I didn't flip it. I rewrote it that weekend. I hosted one last session before taking a break for the holidays. The client was a woman in her 50s, soft-spoken but razor-sharp. She sat in my studio and recorded a spoken word piece about being forgotten in her own family. Her voice cracked in the second take, but she kept going. When we were done, she looked at me and said, "This place, it holds you." I nodded. It held me too. Once, she tilted her head. "You built it to heal others." I paused, then said, "I built it so I could remember I existed." Helping others was a side effect. Later that evening, I received a voicemail from my mother. She didn't try to wrap it in politeness. She just said, "I drove past the event hall. I saw your name on the banner. I know I wasn't invited. I just wanted to say I see it now. Not just the pool or the studio. I see you. I don't expect anything. Just, I hope you're proud of yourself." I didn't call back. I didn't press play twice. I didn't need to, because what I built couldn't be erased. Not with silence, not with regret, not with time. It lived in the walls, the water, the air. And now, finally, it lived in me, the morning after the community event. I woke up to sunlight spilling across my bedroom floor like a quiet promise. There was no applause, no parade, just stillness. But in that stillness lived something stronger than any trophy. A sense that I had finally stepped out of the version of myself that needed to earn belonging and into the version that knew she had already built it. Not borrowed it, not begged for it, built it. Every board, every brick, every decision held in silence, then poured into structure. That was the real victory. Not revenge, not validation. Just the peace of knowing I didn't owe anyone a single explanation anymore. I brewed coffee, same as always. Barefoot in the kitchen, hair tied up, phone on silent. The pool outside shimmered in the early light. Water moving with no urgency, no demand for attention. It existed the way I wanted to, fluid, grounded, unapologetically visible without needing noise. I walked through the house with a clarity I couldn't have imagined just a year ago, back then. I was sleeping on the floor, wondering if I was too sensitive or too quiet or just too much trouble. Now, I walked across polished hardwood floors I'd chosen myself, under light fixtures I'd hung with my own hands, toward a studio I designed to hold people's truth. That transformation didn't need an audience, but I knew someone was watching anyway. Later that afternoon, while cleaning out an old file cabinet in the studio, I found a sketch I'd done years ago, back when I was still in college. Unsure of myself, unsure of what I could create. It was a rough concept for a space I'd called the Echo Room, a soundproof chamber where people could scream, whisper, sing, or speak, and know it would be heard only by the walls. Back then, it felt like a wild idea. Now, standing in a room I'd built with my own story layered into every corner, I realized I hadn't abandoned that dream. I'd just expanded it. I had made the whole house into an echo room, except this time, it didn't trap my voice. It amplified it. The realization made me sit down, not because I was overwhelmed, but because some moments deserve stillness. In that chair, sunlight on my lap, silence humming around me, I understood the quiet power of arrival. Not the arrival people wait for on red carpets or in press releases, but the kind that sneaks up on you after years of being ignored, underestimated, or erased. The kind that whispers, "You made it," not with a shout, but with evidence. That night, I hosted one final gathering before winter. No fanfare, just a handful of people who had been part of the process, clients, collaborators, friends who had shown up when it mattered. I kept it small because intimacy was always my language. We lit candles, played unreleased mixes from our sessions, shared food that didn't require presentation. Halfway through the evening, Jade pulled me aside and said, "You know this right here, it's not just a comeback, it's a blueprint." I smiled, not because I needed to be praised, but because I knew she finally saw it too. This wasn't about the house or the studio or even the pool. It was about choosing to build instead of break, to create instead of collapse. Just before midnight, after the guests left, I stood by the pool with a cup of herbal tea. The air had that late autumn chill, sharp but not unkind. I looked out over the water, soft lights reflecting in ripples, and I thought about all the people who had once made me feel small, not just my mother or Terrell or those silent rooms where I swallowed my voice. I thought about the culture around me, the subtle suggestions that women like me were either too much or not enough. I thought about every door that didn't open, every compliment that came with a caveat, every time someone praised my strength while quietly counting on my silence. And then I let it all go. Not in a dramatic, cinematic moment, just in an internal shift, a quiet decision that said, I am not angry, I am not waiting, I am not performing strength for people who benefit from my restraint. I am simply living, fully, authentically, entirely on my own terms. A week later, I received a letter from the City Council offering a long-term grant to help fund expansion of the audio sanctuary program I'd started. It came with no strings, just belief. That belief had taken years to earn, not because I wasn't ready, but because people had to catch up to what I had always known, that stories, when told without distortion, reshape the entire room, that spaces built with truth have staying power, and that the quietest victories are often the ones that last the longest. In the final days of the year, I made one small change. I replaced the mailbox on my front lawn. The old one still bore my family name, the one that tied me to memories I didn't ask for. I swapped it for a new plate that simply read, Noel's Studio, Est, from Silence. No date, no title, just intention. That change, small as it was, felt louder than anything I'd said all year, and I knew then this wasn't just the end of a story. This was the beginning of one no one could rewrite.